Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session, Being Authentic on Your Climb to the C-Suite. My name is Vanessa Bowling Adjavon, and I'm the Director of Administration and Human Resources here at FACER. We are so excited to host this discussion moderated by the amazing Delia de la Vara, the Senior Vice President of Development and Strategic Initiatives at Unidos US. Delia has some really impressive leaders with her today who will discuss how they stayed true to themselves and maintained their identities as they rose the corporate ladder. Delia, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Delia de la Vara. I'm Senior Vice President of Unidos US, formerly the National Council de Raza. Unidos US is a proud coalition member of ACED since its founding in 1986, and we partner with many of ACED's corporate members as well. I'm honored to be here with you for ACED's Leadership Pipeline program and for today's session, Being Authentic on Your Climb to the C-Suite. We'll hear from 3 top leaders about how they brought their full selves along their journey up the corporate ladder. We have a tight hour, so I won't go through their full bios. I'm going to do a quick intro, but if you want to find out more details about our illustrious speakers, you can find them out through the event platform. So please help me welcome our first panelist, Marjorie de la Cruz, Senior Vice President and General Counsel, Latin America at PepsiCo. In her role, she leads a team of about 100 legal professionals providing support to PepsiCo's $7 billion consumer food and beverage business in Latin America. She's been with PepsiCo for 16 years, although that is clearly not her entire career, but she has committed a lot of her leadership and intellect and knowledge to PepsiCo for the past 16 years in key leadership roles, and also as one of the executive sponsors of Adelante, the Latino Employee Resource Group at PepsiCo. Also joining us today for this important conversation is Monica Diaz, Assistant Vice President of Talent Engagement, Diversity, and Inclusion at Royal Caribbean Group. Monica has decades of experience in leadership and talent development and is a thought leader and regarded public speaker on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this year, she published a book, From Intent to Impact, The 5 Dualities of Diversity and Inclusion, a must-read for you all in DEI. And rounding out the panel is Ramon Lopez, Vice President of Claims Operations at USAA. For over 16 years, he has navigated various business lines and now leads a team of 4,700 claims professionals providing best-in-class service for the military community. We have a very impressive panel, and welcome Marjorie, Monica, and Ramon.
Thank you.
So let's dive in. Thank you all for being here. Let's dive in. Most of us don't start our career out as executives. We learn a lot of hard lessons along the way, including the professional and social cues that we adopt. Let's first start with each of you sharing maybe what you interpret as being authentic in the workplace. And if you can share a quick example of a moment where your authenticity was on display and present for your colleagues. Maybe Marjorie, should we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Delia, and thank you to ACED for having me participate in this panel. Obviously love the work that you do, and I'm glad that whatever my experiences and background is can contribute to this particular program. Being authentic is one of those interesting conversations that we're having in the era of the 21st century diversity and engagement agenda. For me in particular, having come up through a very kind of traditional career in a big law firm setting and then in a big Fortune 50 company, being authentic took on more of the role of what it means to have certain values. I am Dominican by background. I grew up in Washington Heights in New York. So bringing my whole self to work, I would say would be a no-no, right? I wasn't going to show up at the big white shoe firm with my plátanos and my food and the way of speaking. So that wasn't realistic, right? I think that what the reality was that I had to learn how to do a lot of code switching, as we call it, learn how to leverage and adapt my style for whatever the purpose was, whether it was a negotiation, meeting new people, and connecting with people. I think that what remains consistent and what's very, very important in a journey where you're a diverse individual in these environments is to be true to yourself. What are your values? How were you raised? What's important? Integrity, honesty, sincerity, being kind to people, being firm in what is just. I think that at the end of the day, for me, that's been my light post And it continues on today. And I think that I've benefited quite a lot in sticking to those values on a personal level and professionally.
Monica, how about you? You want to go next?
Yeah, no, I would say I can relate to what Marjorie is saying in terms of, like learning what is most effective, and it's going to allow us to be heard in business. And so I would add to what Marjorie is saying. In my case, it was a process of really understanding what were the differences that I brought to the table that I wanted to stick with, and what were the things that I adapted to succeed, adapted myself to succeed, versus the ones that I really disrupted to transform my environment. And that was not something that it was done in a single sitting. It was something that required a lot of introspection. I'll give you an example that I actually wrote about in my book. I learned when I moved from Puerto Rico to corporate in New Jersey, my first corporate relocation, that, my attire, go figure, I was already working as a professional in the Caribbean. And I was wearing my turquoise jacket, my coral polish, nail polish, and all of a sudden, I was speaking with my hands as I typically do, and people were distracted. I realized that something was happening because my words were not coming across. So I learned how to do what were the things that I really wanted to change to allow my voice to be heard, versus the other ones that I really wanted to preserve because it was what I had to think about became part of my identity, how I wanted to show up. And in my book, I tell the story about the difference between assimilation, acculturation, and affirmation, because I had to go through the affirmation of figuring out through a whole learning process that my expression and my accent were part of the identity that I wanted to preserve. So I would not take accent reduction lessons, and I would dress in bright colors, and I would absolutely, be my energetic self, even though that might be a bit different than what I saw in the executive table. But again, that decision didn't come lightly, rapidly, or just out of the blues. It had to be really much something thoughtful to figure out that I was not selling myself just to be heard.
Right, really important. Both you and Marjorie describe, things that we take for granted in our personal life that are really, struggles that we deal with in our professional life. Ramon, what has your experience been? What is an example that you can share with our audience about how you've brought your authentic self into your workplace?
Sure. First and foremost, certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank the other panelists for what I'll learn from them as well. But I take it almost like a cycle. And first and foremost, our community of employees and our customers, or in our case, our members, there is a sense that transparency, authenticity, honesty, that is at the root of almost every conversation that we're having these days. And so I surmise that now more than ever, leaders must be authentic, not only because it's good as a leadership characteristic, but your teams, your employees, your coworkers, your customers, they're demanding of it right now. And so my cycle kind of goes like this. One, as an authentic leader, you must be committed to bettering yourselves, enhancing your skills. And as you do that, in my case, that was going to an executive MBA program almost 13 years into my career to enhance my financial acumen. But as you do that and you look to enhance your skills, you have to wrap that around with what is the self-awareness? What is your own self-awareness? What are you experiencing? What are your strengths? How are you showing up with your teams? And then identify the gaps, and then follow that cycle to self-awareness, identify gaps, continuous improvement in learning and skill set, and then being okay sharing that. Many of us in the professional world and executive ranks call each other perfectionist, and sometimes perfectionists don't allow other folks to see what those leadership gaps are. And so I just look at it like following this cycle of self-awareness and constant commitment to enhancing your skill set is a must to authentic leadership. Now, me personally, what I went through was, I was a Texas native here in San Antonio, Texas, working at USA. I took my family and we took a job opportunity with USA in Virginia. And for those of you who visited Virginia, Virginia has a different demographic than south of the US. And so for me, really getting to know other communities, other demographics, being a minority in Texas, but even having less Hispanics in the location I was at, it was just an opportunity to really learn about other cultures in that space. And so for me, one of my best leadership experiences was really being educated by that specific geographic region. And I consider that one of the skill sets I picked up along the way.
How can you describe, and you describe ways in which your authentic experience has actually is translated into success for the company as well as success for you? You all have obviously, in bringing your full selves to your career, you stand out and you're exemplary leaders. But where do you think that has also helped the company? Because I think that's an important thing for a company to absorb in its culture, to be more accepting of this. We also kind of need to show and remind the companies that we work in and the environments that we work in that this is actually for success for the company as much as it is success for me individually. So do you have examples of where your authentic self and bringing your full self has translated into an opportunity for the company to also see success as much as you've seen it? Let me start with Monica. I'll rotate it around.
So I can share an experience that taught me something that now I have carried like as a blessing, right? It's not easy to be different in an environment of sameness. But when I realized that I could carry my difference as my differentiator, something changed in me. And again, it's a little bit of that struggle that some people don't have to deal with, but we do. It's like we have to make decisions about when are we going to bring our different perspective to the table. But I learned some time ago that if I had a seat at the table and I was the only one who was thinking differently, I'd rather, as you would hear in Hamilton, I'm not going to waste my shot, right? And what I learned is that in certain occasions when people were discussing marketing strategies or hiring strategies, there were things that were uncomfortable to say, stereotypes that I could see floating in the air as people were having a conversation about women, about Latinos, about Black, about LGBT community, that if this was before I was working in D&I, if I didn't bring that point to the table, probably I was the only person who at the table had a different perspective. As difficult as that was, I figured I can't waste my shot. If not me, who? Do we have to wait for another generation or another executive to bring this point? And it is not an easy decision because you don't want to be the one that always brings the different perspective. But it's choosing which are the points that you will want to carry and that you will want to represent, because it is not only about us and how uncomfortable it can be. Is it for people that we want to follow, right? If we want others in this leadership pipeline to have a shot, we need to open that door. And as uncomfortable as it can be, we need to be okay with being the first ones to bring the topic, so we're not the last ones to bring a topic to the table. Marjorie?
I mean, I would add to that my entire career at PepsiCo and my success at PepsiCo has been based on the fact that I created a niche, right? A niche that has enabled me to combine my US education with a cultural sensibility that not only extended to being a diverse thinking person at the table, but ultimately in bringing a value add and becoming a cultural bridge in my current role as general counsel of our Latin America business. That has, I believe, been of great value to PepsiCo. When you are able to translate what a corporate-minded headquarters initiative is looking to do, implementing that in developing countries with its own struggles and challenges, You do have to operate as a bridge, not only to land those programs and initiatives locally, but then translating that back and having corporate understand what those challenges are, what can be done, what we can't do, how to influence people in terms of an understanding of what those challenges are, and frankly, what other things we are doing locally because of those specific experiences that we have in our countries that corporate may not have in mind. I think I've been able to operate in a way that enables both sides of the business to get a better understanding of each other. And for me personally, to provide a kind of a roadmap for others to find not only what the Latino experience and value add is from a US perspective, but frankly, building a bridge and career development between Latin America and the Latino experience in the US.
How about you, Ramon? Any examples do you want to share?
Yeah, I think of two examples, and so the folks who work right alongside me, almost 5,000 service professionals. My authentic self and who I am, I started the company as in that role, providing service to our military community at USA, and to this day, I make it a point to talk to our membership on member service phone calls and be able to still understand what our members are going through and still provide service. And that's just who I am. And I often share those experiences that yes, I am a senior executive in this organization. At the same time, I want to always make sure I have the skills and I understand the experiences that are happening between our members and our frontline employees. And so that is something I commit to on a periodic basis. I think the second story that comes to mind is at USA, we have quite a recreation league. And the various sports, I often would come out and talk to employees, and there are many team leaders, GMs, and coaches of the Latino and Latina community. And I just go around asking some of them, like, what's your role? How do you help support the mission at USA? And they talk about their jobs. And, as I see them coaching and mentoring, even executives on the field and on the court, I ask them, have you ever thought about becoming a leader at USA and leading a team inside the building? And I'll tell you, at times I get, no, it hasn't even occurred to me. Once I started with the company, I love the company. That's really as far as I thought I'd go. And I haven't even thought about it, Ramon. And so that has led to, amongst other things, the creation of our diversity business groups. And so I'm interested that I think Pepsi's diversity business group is Adelante. Ours is the same name at USA. And so experiences like those and just reaching out and asking, and then it's okay because folks know that I personally still do the job at times, understand what the issues are, just builds credibility. And that type of authenticity, I think it really connects with our employees and hopefully finding a new ground for leadership training amongst our Latino and Latina employees.
Well, something that Marjorie just mentioned, and I think it's implied in also what you just described, Ramon, being a bridge, connecting that corporate speak to experiences that are that we have individually, culturally, or in our environment. That's part of, I think, what we also want to talk about. It's great to talk about how being authentic has really helped us and champion our pathway up the ladder. But we also have some moments where it's been really difficult and where it was not received very well. Monica, you kind of described in comment in probably a much more favorable light than probably what the actual conversation or experience felt like back then, when you walked in with more colorful clothing, with hand gestures. I'm doing it right now. It's just second nature. We don't know it until we start to see those eyes look at us, kind of, making us feel a little different. And we are different, but it should be embraced. So where that can kind of be very scary. And I think for people who are watching us and listening to this conversation, can we be a little frank about where you might have had an uncomfortable moment, and maybe even how your authenticity helped stop or curb an experience from that happening to other colleagues down the road. I mean, do you feel like because of where you are now and because of how you've been authentic, you've been able to either stem or redirect some of those experiences for others to have a better pathway and a better opportunity to bring their authentic selves to their workplace? Can you describe, because we want to hear also when it's not so, when it doesn't feel in the moment like it's going to have a happy ending. You're obviously at that happy ending, but what were some of the more difficult moments that you had to kind of change things or help things get changed in your environment? Margie, I'll start with you.
So, I mean, I also have experienced the subtle, sometimes looks and comments about the colors that I'm wearing, the way my hair kind of, is styled, or some of the animated way that I speak. I've heard that, direct speak as well. It's funny. Initially, and I remember working in an advertising agency right after college before I went to law school, I was getting these kind of subtle remarks, comments. You seem quite direct and animated, or not really sure how serious you are about this experience or this position, because I'm happy or jovial in the way that I go about my work. It was only upon reflection over time that I realized that these microaggressions were actually very real, and they were intended actually to signal that maybe I didn't belong, right? And that was very hurtful to hear. That evolved over time. I mean, there's not a point in my career where there wasn't something that was said that was very uncomfortable. My first, experience at the big law firm, most of the time, the only woman at the table, let alone the only person of color at the table, hearing things like, oh, how did you make your way into the law firm? And was this an affirmative action program? Or, do you even know this environment of working with investment banks? I've heard it all. But one of the things that has always propelled me is hanging on to my family's experience and my parents' experience in immigrating to the United States and finding themselves in a strange land where they felt on multiple occasions all the time that they didn't belong, feeling like they shouldn't continue to try to persevere and make a better life for my sister and I always would remind myself and say, there's nothing that I'm going through that they didn't go through 10 times over. And I'm not going to let whatever these people say negate or make me feel like I don't belong or that I'm not just as good and that I can't power through. So when it comes to the issue around authenticity, I think that you have to remind yourself what you come from, what you're made of, the cloth that you're cut from. That's what drives me, has always driven me. And I think that we as a community in the United States have to be very clear that we absolutely belong here. I mean, this is kind of just as much our land as it is anybody else's. And I think that those microaggressions are just that, they're just noise, right? And being authentic to your values and your history and what you come from is really what matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, Monica, your work, because you've done a lot of work in transforming organizational culture. Where do you think this fits in? We have folks who are listening to this conversation who are also in HR, who have the power to influence that, who have the power to be more aware. What advice or what guidance can you give them about how they can use that to create experiences and environments in the workplace that receive authenticity in a better way for the benefit of the company too?
I think that part of what we were talking about before about being authentic, which is the topic that we're talking about, is like using that authenticity for our advantage. And being authentic, right? We have to go deep and do some introspection to figure out who we really are, right? What tools work better for us? And that's not something that do this, do that. That might be a tool for me, which is different for Ramon, which is different for Marjorie. That's authenticity. And it has to start from within. So there's not a prescription, in my view, of how do you create this level of comfort for somebody to be authentic and to create change. But I will tell you how I came up with my own, and what I advise others to do is look inside, figure out what are your strengths. How do you feel comfortable being authentic and doing two things? Your difference, how is it that your difference becomes your differentiator if you want to stick with it, right? As you can see, probably I'm not wearing coral nail polish anymore. I dropped that one. But it's my choice. I didn't do it for anybody else, but I didn't drop my color in my attire. As simple as that sounds, that was a conscious decision on my part. And what I advise others that really helped me is figure out for yourself what is it that you can do to call it out and diffuse it. Let me give you an example. People kind of were starting to say, and when I related about that story, that I had an accent. And I didn't study in the US. I studied in Puerto Rico. So if I have an accent, what I now say to people when I know that that's what they're thinking, I call it. In the first 5 minutes that you meet me, I will tell you, you may hear that I have an accent. I don't hear it, but I hear yours. So call it, diffuse it, it's done. We're over it. Now they can pay attention to me. They don't need to be thinking, she has an accent, she has an accent. Where's that? Yes, I do have one. I don't hear it, but it's from Puerto Rico, and I hear yours, you don't hear mine. So that kind of like calling it, diffusing it, and then proceed is something that really works out, right? The same way, you know, if you hear it, so that's humorous. If I'm in a more serious crowd, I will just use the same strategy, call it and diffuse it to say, by the way, research has demonstrated, because I had to look into these things. It was my identity. I wanted to make sure that I could prove that I have a seat at the table and that people can get over that. So I would say, you know, research has proven that people get over an accent in the first 6 minutes after a conversation is met. If you cannot get over it, you might want to check your bias. So it's not that it's your brain playing tricks on you. It just might just be that there's another thing. It's not that you cannot process my accent. So that's a little bit more on the sarcastic side for people who are more intellectual. So again, choose your tools. And I chose those who I was comfortable with. I can go on the edge of humor. I can go on the edge of being sarcastic if I need to, depending on my audience, because at the end of the day, what we want is to have our message come across. So, and that starts looking inside. It's not that my tools are going to be good for somebody else. You have to use yours. What are your strengths?
How about you, Ramon? You know, in Monica's now dropping tips. It was going to be one of my questions coming up, but you know, I think that's a really important one, and having the confidence to kind of drop some of these tools in different settings with different tones. You know, you want to read the room, you want to know how far you can push, but calling it out a little bit more earlier in the setting, as opposed to waiting for it to just kind of fester. What have you adopted in terms of being able to bring your authentic self and serving as an example for others on your team to do that?
It's a really good question, and one that has been hard for me in the sense. I can certainly relate to your parents and your grandparents and your family and your culture and just where you come from. For me, I saw my parents struggle tremendously to be able to move cities, to be able to provide an education for me and my family, my siblings. And what that resulted in, and I didn't realize this until years into my career, what that resulted in was a situation where being a workaholic was like the norm. And I always felt that I owed my family so much more, because I always felt bad for the struggles that they went through to be able to provide an education for me. And so years into my career, I'm working so many hours. There's not really a work-life balance. And that was brought on by me. That was an internal thing. And so just stopping to reflect that I indeed needed to take time and to recognize milestones, recognize the gratuities and the recognition that I've been a part of. And before that, I was just passing those by. It was like the next hour, the next day, the next week. And so, the tools that I leverage now is a lot of self-reflection. And so for me, that's, once a day, before I go to work, I'm self-reflecting about the accomplishments, about any gratuities I would like to give others, and just really hold myself accountable for not overdoing it on the working side. Now, at the same time, that can show up in many different ways. So taking vacation and truly being off and giving your teams back at home the empowerment and the authority to make great decisions, because the strategy doesn't change when you leave the building or leave the virtual building. And so for me, really just finding the time at least once a day to be able to self-reflect and identify that working more is not something your family has asked you to do, but that's kind of internal pressures you put on yourself to continuously prove to others that you belong in that space. And so it's something that I continuously work on every day, but one that at least I'm at a point in my career, a maturation perspective, that I can recognize now that I'm going through it. And so every day is an opportunity to work on that.
Yeah, and I mean that also is reminiscent of what Marjorie also mentioned in terms of accountability to your family and to what they've invested in you to be successful as well. I mean, I think that's a driver for a lot of us individually. How we're able to bring that into the workplace is sometimes not an easy thing for folks to recognize. And so it's good to share that out publicly to remind folks this is what helped propel you all into your positions of influence within the company and leadership within the company, and that it is something that we're talking about this more. I mean, I don't know that we weren't having these conversations about as deeply, as openly, as frankly a year ago. Definitely over the past 7 months, we've been talking about a lot of things to break down some of the barriers to making these conversations and the actions more accessible and real. Any other tips, Marjorie, that you have to add to this? We got family, we got calling out differentiators, accountability to oneself and to those who've invested in us. Any other last tips?
I think that as you think about developing a network, right? Your network of people that you find, you're trying to look for advocates, you're trying to look for folks that you want to develop relationships with. I think that if you use these personal experiences to connect with them, to know them and to have them get to know you, I think it's surprising how many of these experiences are not unique to our community as Latinos and Latinas. I mean, one of my now mentors, who's the CEO of RB, we got to know each other. I learned about his experience growing up very poor in India, his mother's sacrifices to get him to have a solid education, to immigrate to the United States. And next thing you know, he and I were talking about leadership values that were based on very similar experiences. And that then nurtured a mentorship, a relationship with him that I believe has benefited my career, but he also then used it to learn how to leverage that as he was the CEO of the PepsiCo Latin America business. That's just another example. I think that taking those opportunities to get to know folks, to be transparent and open, be a little bit courageous about your own life experience, I think can be really a really strong propeller for your career development. But it all starts with, like Ramon says, quality work product. You've got to have credibility. You've got to deliver results. And then you create the space to have those more open conversations and really move an organization and individual influential people to do the right thing and create those safe spaces for our Latino and Latinas in the company.
How has this kind of reflected in leadership models that you see? So as the title of the session, being authentic under road to the C-suite, are you seeing this changing the kind of the leadership model that is at the C-suite level, and then on that path to C-suite, or do you think there's still a lot more to be done, and where should people kind of be keeping their eyes in terms of how we're changing that pathway to C-suite, to executive positions within our companies, to be more embracing and receptive to us sharing ourselves and bringing ourselves as leaders in our full capacities to that path?
Yeah, I would say,
yeah, Monica probably has the right perception about this sort of thing, the informal versus the formal, right?
yeah, and I think that it is part of, there's this lesson that, we have learned, but this is very relevant at this moment. It is you have to be in the game to change the game. Changing the game from the sidelines is way hard, right? So the way of changing, the way we are included in the conversation is to be part of the conversation. Sometimes it gets confusing. And I have mentored a number of Latinos and Latinas who are saying, well, I want to, go with this, and this is what I am, and it's who I am, and accept me, or take it or leave it. It's like, whoa, wait a second. Be in the game if you want to change the game. So it's a little bit about what Ramon was saying. You have to deliver the goods, and then you can open space for more people. But that's a little bit of that situation in which, just to take the gender diversity, women used to have to dress up like men, right? In order to even have a seat at the table before. Well, they got in, dressed like men, and then they opened up spaces for greater affirmation. So it's almost like we're in this progress, and it is good to have disruption, but it is the fine balance between, again, as I said, how do you really adapt to succeed and make sure that you have a seat at the table, and then disrupt to transform. There's not a formula. You just have to finagle and figure it out as you go along, because you don't want to be so far off that people put you in an island that that's too different. But you want to open space for others. And there has to be this fine balance that it starts with what we have talked about already, that introspection, that reflection. You can have strong convictions about how you want to see the workplace operate for you. That's a strong sense of values, what Marjorie mentioned. That's your conviction. But that is not just one thing. You have to incorporate the other things that we're talking about. Your reflection, your introspection to say, how am I going to balance these things so I can still have a seat at the table and my voice can be heard so I can really drive more change? Those are combinations that you discover along the way with observation and with good mentors. Okay, so can help you see a little bit ahead outside of yourself, because it's hard to see these things on our own. It's very hard. It's a lot easier when somebody's looking from outside of our own bodies, right? To see how we're operating or how we're thinking.
Yeah, and I would say from my perspective, our community at USAA have requested for us to speak out on racial injustice, and everyone from senior leadership wise, our CEO, to the president of our company, I think we'll be the first ones to say, I don't have all the answers, but I do know that we're going to treat people with respect, and we're going to create a safe environment, and we're going to seek to understand. And at USA, our core values, I was proud. I've never been more proud, actually, to be a USA employee than to see what our most senior level leaders across the company have actually not remained silent about, who have gone out on LinkedIn, who have gone out on our company blog to all of our membership and say, here's where I stand. I may not know everything. I may not have all the answers, but you know what? I'm going to get educated. One of the things that was a recent add to USA was our CEO is now the leader of a council, of a D&I council across USA. And for me, that's the first time I've heard of the CEO leading the council. And so I'm fortunate to be a part of that council, but I feel it and sense it more that silence around key topics, it's just not tolerated anymore. And I'm just happy to see that many organizations, including ours, are speaking out and speaking up. And to be out to, in terms of authenticity, just may not have all the answers, but are committed to learning more about the topic. So I see it.
Yeah, that's definitely something that the past 7-8 months have really opened us up to, is both the challenge of wanting to be participating in the change in this movement that's happening in our country. I mean, this isn't just the 7 months, though. We were seeing this with movements on family separation, on Me Too, and employees holding their companies accountable for the past few years in new and different ways than we've seen in corporate America before, and more so with the past 7 months. And I think it's great to have 3 of you here, but there are so many others too who have a similar story of where their authenticity has helped them be even more successful in their companies and more successful for their companies. And that's an example that we need to lift up and share more, because you all are kind of creating a new wave of leadership, setting the tone for a new wave of leadership that corporate America hasn't seen. And its diversity, its inclusivity, its intersectionality are all really important. And the more we can see that in individuals, then building out your network starts taking a slightly different shape. Building out your pool of mentors looks different and evolves to include more and more of you. So I'm excited about where this goes, and I think I still have a few questions before I get too excited about that prospect. But are there challenges that you find in I think time, and I know Marjorie, I was fortunate to be able to have some time with her in January up in Purchase, but I know her time is really limited. How do you make time to kind of share this and expose this to others on their climb to the C-suite? I mean, we have to invest in ourselves, but we also have to invest in those who are coming behind us. How do you use these examples and your experience to kind of open that up for folks coming behind you and keeping that door open?
No, absolutely. I mean, like anything else, you have to be intentional, right? And it's something that has to be top of mind. I mean, for me, paying it forward is part of my personal philosophy. Again, driven by my upbringing and how it was paid forward to me. Also paid forward by many others that are not people of color, Americans that advocated for me and really provided opportunities for me. I feel that it's part of the cycle of being a good person in life, in sharing my own story informally, but also formally through these types of programs, through being intentional with who we recruit, how we retain them, asking questions about why people may not look at a particular candidate, putting in an organization to think about their candidate pools and the people that they recruit differently. Looking at different places where we can find more representation within the company. So you have to be very, very intentional, and you have to take the time. And yes, we're all short on time. We're all very busy, but it has to be important to you. And if it's important to you, then you force and you start moving an organization to make it important for the organization. Very proud, like Ramon, very proud with what PepsiCo is doing in terms of creating very publicly some very significant commitments in terms of African American and Latino representation, not only within the company but also within the communities where we operate. I mean, we are a company that sells to the world and to the mainstream and mom and pop, and we have to reflect who our consumers are, and we have to be engaged in the communities that we serve. So that's very, very important. But then it also takes some work in working with my colleagues, right? Not everyone is quite as comfortable in having these conversations just yet. So there's the formal programs that I think that are very important, but it's also those informal conversations, which I think, at least at a culture like PepsiCo, are equally as important and influential. You kind of have to do both.
Well, I can share to add to what Marjorie is saying, and I completely agree with what she brought up. I think for me, like there are things that, as she said, you have to be intentional about it. And by the way, no pun intended, that's part of the title of my book. So I completely agree. It is about putting some action behind your words. And we say that about other leaders, right? But how do we apply it ourselves? So a coach that I've had for a long time asked me once, as a leader, you get paid for doing or for thinking? And we're like, okay, I think both. They're like, okay, so how much time do you spend doing? Oh my gosh, all the time. I'm in meetings, I was like, super busy. How much time do you spend thinking? On the weekends? So I said, like, okay, there's something wrong with that picture, right? So by virtue of asking the question, I figured out that some of the things that are important to me, I was not intentionally booking time on my calendar for. And that speaks about health and well-being as well, right? And that's becoming even more important now. So those things need to be in the calendar the same way. And we live in technology, so we have integrated lives, and our calendar should be integrated. And a way in which I learned how to do that, to allow myself to have conversations with the talent pipeline, was I don't have any standing meetings on Fridays. Fridays are my time to strategize, to think, to network, to research. And as I joined Royal Caribbean 30 days ago, somebody quickly saw that my calendar was getting completely full. And this is like, oh my gosh, so when do you need time with Monica? It's like, well, probably it's going to be in another 3 weeks because she's busy. And I said, like, I have to speak with the person managing my calendar. I said, like, no, please do not say that to anybody. We prioritize and reprioritize to make sure that it's not first come, first serve. It is what is important will get done first. What gets it's most important. That's being intentional. And that for me means that in a very simplistic way, nobody should be, if you want to speak with me, it will never be more than a week away. Never. Because every Friday I can repurpose, reprioritize. If I cannot give you a minute on the rest of the week, I can talk to you on Friday. It's a matter of reprioritizing. And as simple as that sounds, it has allowed me to make sure that I'm intentional and that I am actionable. So people don't have to wait because I'm too busy. Never too busy to do what is most important.
Yeah, Monica, I love that. I was just like shaking my head so much listening to you talk. For me, we take a look at the calendar in totality on a monthly basis. And I have already allocated how much time I want to spend on strategy, how much I want to spend on people, how much time I want to spend on compliance and regulatory matters. Like I have a calendar, and if I have a pie chart, I should be getting 30% here, 40% here. And that's how my monthly calendar is segmented. If you think about it, if you're 80% true to that, then you're spending your time as responsible as possible. And so for me, absolutely prioritizing, understanding, and it may look different next month based on a lot of things, right? It's fourth quarter, maybe the things are closing. And I think the second piece is don't be intimidated by other platforms. I know, like for me, it's like the same email tool I've used for the past, I don't know how long. Of course, now we have our, text message is super simple, but maybe your community wants to be on Slack. And the first thing we say is, I don't do that. Like, I'm not going to be in that. That's just one more platform. I can't do another one. But if you're going to scale your voice and reach others, find out where your audience is really communicating and commit to maybe shutting down one of your channels, maybe adopting a new one if you can reach more scale that way.
That's so interesting.
Very good tips and just reminders. I think the reprioritizing is definitely one. There aren't enough hours in the day. We have to reprioritize if we're going to get the work done, if we're going to get to what's most important. I also like what Marjorie mentioned, just the simple reminders of being a good person in the work that we do. That drives a lot of our intentionality, a lot of the quality of our work, and a lot of the environment that we're in and that we're bringing around us. And sometimes we forget that those simple things of just, being good, being respectful, being treating people with dignity, but also expecting that in return is really important. It's not just what we give, it's what we hold ourselves accountable to for ourselves and for our families, our children, the legacy and the model that we're going to be, and for our peers, for our colleagues that are watching us, that are looking up to us. There are the sector is going through a lot of change and growth and stretching in unique ways. We talked about these movements, these social justice movements and social movements. We're in an election, and we have. I know with Pepsi, we were just on a call with Pepsi and several other of our partners making big commitments to racial equity. So this conversation about how we are authentic in our space and how we are a model for others is really important, and all feeds and connects into that. And I really appreciate having a chance to hear from you, to have you share your experiences, your gems of wisdom, your stories with us and with our audience. And I think with that, we're about wrapped up. So thank you all for your time and for your generosity.
Thank you. It's been a
very
pleasure.
much.
Thank you, Delia, and thank you all of our speakers. None of this would be possible without the support of our sponsors. I'd like to thank our session sponsor, Toyota, for your support of HACER and your commitment to Hispanic inclusion. Please watch this video from Toyota.
Sí, sé que tenemos todos los factores de riesgo.
But we also have all it takes to fight contra el COVID-19.
El coronavirus está afectando a la comunidad latina más rápido que a otros grupos.
Acecha a nuestros miembros más débiles.
With pre-existing conditions like diabetes,
Hipertensión,
Y asma.
And those who can't work from home.
and it's spreading through myths that deceive our community.
El virus es serio y mortal y nuestra respuesta debe ser en serio.
Los remedios caseros no nos van a proteger.
To beat COVID-19,
Hay 4 pasos.
Quédate en casa.
if you have to go to work,
Mantén 6 pies de distancia con los demás. Usa máscara.
and protect your hands.
lávate esas manos.
Por 20 segundos o más.
The more we follow these 4 simple steps,
Podremos salvar más amigos y seres queridos.
From COVID-19.
Hashtag nosotros contra el COVID.
Find out how you can fight back at cdc.gov/coronavirus.
Thank you again to Toyota for your continued partnership. Our sponsors provide the support necessary to help us achieve our mission and are crucial to what we do here at HACER. Coming up, we have a 30-minute networking break. Feel free to use the break to mingle with fellow attendees in the networking lounge, or head over to the exhibit hall to meet our sponsors and read some of the reports from the HACER Research Institute. After that, we have our next session at 1:35, The Enterprise Mindset. Do you have it? With Carla Harris. See you then.